ConTinual's One-on-One, a conversation with some of our favorite authors. My name's Jean Marie Ward. I will be your host today. And with us is really one of our favorite authors, Seanan McGuire, the award-winning best-selling writer of such titles, such series as October Day, the Encrypted series, the Ghost Road series, the Wayward Children series, and as Mira Grant, the Newsflesh series and Parasitology. Welcome, Seanan.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so thrilled you're here. You've written so much. How did you get started on all of these worlds?
I wrote a massive amount of pornography.
That works.
Yep. I was a fanfic author for years, and like many, I'm not going to say all because it's far from all, but like many fanfic authors, I very much wanted to use my time in fanfic to learn to be a better writer so I could start doing my original stuff. And my agent was looking for clients. We have a mutual friend who pointed her at me, and she read my Buffy the Vampire Slayer porn and signed me.
Oh, great. So what do you think was the biggest lesson you learned from fanfic?
So what I got was from fanfic. Was there a question there?
Yes. What do you feel was the number one lesson that writing fanfic taught you? How to write good dialogue, how to create compelling characters, how to work in somebody else's universe. What do you think was the best part of it?
How to put words in a line. I mean, honestly, one of the things that we don't really talk about that much when we talk about writing is that it is a muscle. It is a craft like anything else. And I hate the word craft because it always winds up tacked onto something enormously pretentious. But in this case, it's a thing that you practice doing. There was a time when hitting 100 pages on a project meant I was committed. I was all in. I was staying there till the end because I had done so much work. And now hitting 100 pages on a project is a Tuesday because I have had so much practice and have taken so much time to refine that skill. And the place I first learned how to do that was in fanfic. Because in fanfic, sometimes I would have a 60-page story. I would have a 30-page story, whatever. When I first started, I was coming out of high school where a 4-page essay was a big deal. So learning how to work at a high volume really was the greatest thing fanfic gave me. Second only to, I wrote for a while in high school for a fanzine for ElfQuest, which was actually a print paper fanzine. I still have it in my closet behind me. And my editor was Arlene Harris. And like the majority of fans, really, just not even writers, the majority of fans, I was the smartest kid in my high school. And that's not an arrogant thing to say because there are thousands upon thousands of high schools. And the smart kid does not get graded as carefully as the less smart kid. It isn't how it works. The teacher doesn't have time for you. If you're one who will get a passing grade, learn the lessons, and absorb what the school expects you to absorb, then the teacher's like, okay, great. I'm so sorry that I don't have time to give you the specialized attention you need, but you're going to be fine. So Arlene was the first time anyone had ever edited me. I turned in my first story for her fanzine, and she sent it back to me just dripping red. It was like Jack the Ripper had been at my story. I had no idea how to deal with that because I had never been edited in my life. And having her do that taught me that sometimes you can be wrong about your own story. You have to learn how to listen and make it better.
So you got lessons in editorial revision and critique long before you started submitting to professional magazines or publishers.
I did.
That was a very useful lesson to learn.
And a very lucky lesson to learn. The age of paper fanzines was ending just as I was getting to the point where I was participating in them. And these days, fanzines are pretty much entirely virtual. I'm not saying that barriers to publication are a good thing, But when they were on paper, when fanzines were a physical item, someone had to pay for that paper. So there was a small barrier to publication in that you would have an editor, you would have someone who said, this story needs to be better before I pay to print it. That's not there anymore. Now you just pop onto AO3 and punch all your stuff into the form. And that's great. That's amazing. That has been a huge leveling for the fanfic community because it doesn't shut people out. But it also means that you're not necessarily getting those same lessons in editorial. That's not going to mean that you can't become an amazing writer just through fanfic. It does mean, though, that that is not a lesson you should go into fanfic expecting someone to teach you.
Though, as you say, there are a lot of good reasons to start in fanfic. Was October Day a development of a fanfic character, or
No,
did she spring fully formed like Athena?
neither.
Okay. How did she come about?
Toby is a combination of a whole bunch of factors, including a couple of things that happened to me. The fact that I went to school for a folklore degree. Folklore degrees do not qualify you to do very much in the real world other than teach folklore. And I didn't finish my degree because I ran out of money. So I'm standing around with half of a folklore degree and all of these reference books on the Fae, and no idea how I'm going to turn them into anything useful. And there are people who would argue I didn't turn them into anything useful. I turned them into an urban fantasy series. But that's really kind of where she came out of. It was the work ethic I got from fanfic that enabled me to start writing full-length books pretty much out the gate, rather than any actual contributing DNA.
Was she the first character who wound up being a full book for you that was later published, or were some of your other series started first?
Nope, Toby predates them all at this point. Rosemary and Rue took me 10 years to beat into a saleable shape. I wrote that book over and over again for literally a decade before it got to a condition where anyone would be willing to give me money to publish it.
That's a very good that's a good lesson to learn for our viewers as well, because, in other words, don't give up on your first draft or your 31st.
Yeah, something like my 31st. Don't give up on, if you really think that a story and a character has legs, you are either deluding yourself, which is okay if you're doing other things, if you've got a job, if you're not making someone support you full time while you beat on something that everyone in the world has turned down, that's fine. Do spare time on that. Make that your hobby. Everyone knew I was writing a book long before anybody got to see it. And just don't drop it if you really think that that is the story that you need to tell and that is the story that the world will respond to. Keep working on it. Odds are decent you might be right.
Yeah. And was she the same character when you started as when you finished the book? And has her cycle, has her series gone in ways that you would have predicted at the end of Rosemary and Rue, or did it surprise you?
I mean, I was 18 when I started Rosemary and Rue. I don't think I'm the same author at this point.
No.
Everything has changed. I don't honestly think I could write the version of Toby that 18-year-old Shannon was writing, just because I'm too grown up at this point. I'm too jaded. Too much. Toby is actively smarter than she was when I started, because one of the problems that younger writers often have, and I include myself on this list, is you don't yet understand how to make a plot work if your characters are smart enough to think their way through it. So you tend to write plots with a lot of the character is going to be a little bit stupid here. The character is going to do something a little bit unreasonable just to try and move the plot forward. So my notes on the first 3 or 4 books were pretty much entirely, Toby is smarter than this. You have written Toby smarter than this. Toby needs to actually behave like she's smarter than this. The shape of the overall story has stayed roughly the same. There have been some side trips that I didn't anticipate. because my biggest ethos as a writer is that actions have consequences. That is how I do life. That is how I do fiction. If I hit you, you are not going to be my friend anymore. If I hit you hard enough, maybe you're going to call the police and charge me with assault. I don't know. But if I'm writing the book, when Toby hits someone, they're not an ally. If she hits them hard enough, maybe the law is getting involved. And if she hits someone because it makes sense in the moment and I didn't anticipate her hitting them, maybe the next book is her going to trial.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that. Yes. When in this process did you get the first idea that became encrypted? Was it an outgrowth of Toby, or was it something independent that suddenly you went, I want to do something a bit more fun?
So, encrypted is probably the closest you can find in my work to did it come from fanfic. I used to be a huge fan of a show called Supernatural, which in its first 4 or 5 seasons was a story about American folklore and the stories that residents of the United States tell themselves about the road and the cornfields and our urban legends and myths, which was a big focus of mine when I was at university, was digging into those stories and where do they come from and what do we know and understand about where they come from. And then in season 4, I think, they made a hard left turn into angels are real and all that matters is angels, and they killed all the women. Just all of them.
Oh dear.
I have never forgiven them for that. So I tell people that the entirety of Encrypted is an apology to Joe Harvell from Supernatural. Like the whole series, it's not Supernatural fanfic. It's not that world. It's not even that world with the serial numbers filed off. I didn't take any of their stuff, but it is a big apology to the women of that genre for the amount of misogyny that you tend to find in the male-centric properties.
Mm-hmm.
That and my friend Kate, who was my personal assistant at the time, she is currently the chair of the Memphis Worldcon bid, turned to me on the couch one night and said, "Hey," I said, "What?" And she says, "Write something that gets us invited to go backstage at So You Think You Can Dance."
Another fandom?
Yep, I love So You Think You Can Dance. It was a show we always watched together before she moved south and I moved northwest.
Yeah.
And so I wrote us a series about people who use ballroom dance to fight monsters and got invited backstage at So You Think You Can Dance. Everybody needs goals.
I think that's a wonderful goal. Did encrypted come first, or you were talking about the stories that Americans tell themselves, the stories of the roads, and that is, of course, the primary focus of the Ghost Road series, which includes characters from encrypted, specifically Mary
Yep.
and.
They are the only 2 series I have that cross over at all. Technically, Ghost Roads came first because Jennifer Brozak, who is another Seattle area author and a good friend of mine, used to edit a magazine called The Edge of Propinquity.
Mm-hmm.
And when she did it, she would purchase stories from people for every issue, and she would have stories from what she called her universe authors in every issue. And that was an author who had been commissioned at the start of the year to write 1 story a month for 12 issues. So that every month when you came back to the magazine, you got to feel like you were coming into something continuing and still have something completely new. She asked me to be one of her universe authors, and I asked, "What do you want me to write about?" And she says, "Well, you have all these songs about this hitchhiking ghost character. Why don't you write about her?" So I wound up writing Sparrow Hill Road for The Edge of Propinquity. And while this was going on, I was conceiving and composing the first encrypted novel, which got picked up by Daw. And then they did well enough that we were able to convince Daw that they should purchase Sparrow Hill Road and allow me to print it as what's called a fix-up novel.
Mm-hmm.
So Sparrow Hill Road is actually a fix-up novel rather than a true narrative. The second book in that series, The Girl in the Green Silk Gown, is a true narrative. And so is the third, Angel of the Overpass, which comes out later this year.
Oh, cool. Any idea of what month or?
May.
May. Okay, so it'll be coming out just about the time this interview airs, actually. which is
Yay.
great timing. Yeah, sometimes serendipity happens. Yes, indeed. The edge of propinquity, I'm going to screw that
Propinquity.
up. Propinquity, okay. You know, doing that particular serialized story seems to feed into something that was happening about the same time that Encrypted was getting off the ground. You were doing an Amazon serial that I believe is called Indexing, which
Yep.
created it relates to the folklore index and features characters from various fairy tales, etc., acting out, well, trying to avoid their fate, if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
Um,
indexing was based on the Arne Thompson index to motifs in folklore and fairy tale, which is not a thing that one really thinks you should be able to base urban fantasy off of. It is a dry scholarly text. I own one. I will be smug about this till I die. I'm going to be buried with that thing. It belonged to the state folklorist of Minnesota.
uh-huh.
She retired. I contacted her office to find out what she was doing with her research materials, and they told me that it would be liquidated through a local bookstore called Makers and Quinn. So I called Makers and Quinn and asked them, do you actually have the Arne Thompson index? And they said, yes, it's $500. And I said, put that on hold. I'll be in Minnesota in a week, because I was going there for a convention. And so I bought the Arne Thompson index to motifs in folklore and fairy tale, and it is the most beautiful book. Oh my God. 6 volumes, library bound. I sometimes let other folklorists touch it, because you don't get near these things. They're unfindable. You get one when someone dies or retires.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought her Arne Thompson. I also bought her Catherine Briggs index to the folklore of the British Isles, which is a slightly less difficult to find scholarly text. And it was the most money I think to this day have ever spent on books in one go. Tax deductible. I was fine with it. Didn't care. They are research materials, although indexing was partially written to justify the fact that I had bought the Arne Thompson index, but I'm not actually working in the academic field. Later that year, Paul Cornell, who writes the Witches of Lichford series for Tor.com, and also wrote a bunch of Marvel comics, used to write for Doctor Who, really sweet guy. Paul Cornell and I were at the same convention, and he's a friend of mine. So he calls me over and goes, Seanan, I need to introduce you to my friend Bill. And he leads me to this gentleman and says, this is Bill Willingham. He wrote Fables. The two of you are both folklorists. You're going to be interviewing him at Worldcon in a month. Why don't the two of you talk and figure out what you have in common? I'm like, okay, cool. I really like Fables. I am happy to talk to Bill Willingham. Mm-hmm. And, we're chatting for a little bit. And he says, you're a folklorist. I go, yeah, I am. I went to UC Berkeley in their folklore program. I'm a folklorist. He says, did you know that the state folklorist of Minnesota just retired? And I'm like, yeah, actually, I was aware of that. Funny, but I knew. And he says, I was on book tour, and some out-of-town bitch snuck in and shoved her Arne Thompson index right out from underneath me. And he's like clearly expecting me to get indignant on his behalf. And instead I said, I'm the out-of-town bitch. We are not friends. We are not enemies, but we did not become fast friends from that moment.
Did you actually conduct the Worldcon interview?
I did.
And no fist flew, so that's a win.
Nope.
I'm good with that. Yeah.
He is a nice gentleman. He wanted the Arne Thompson, and I am occasionally worried that, since you do know when I'm traveling because my convention schedule is posted, that he's going to have my house burgled or something. But I don't expect him to smack me.
Yeah, but you have Maine Coons. They're better than, they're better than
guard dogs. And I have housemates. My house is never completely empty.
Yeah. Attack cats. Every writer needs them. So as I see the large furry in the background, large ginger.
Oh, that's Meg. Mm-hmm. She is the most profoundly stupid cat you have ever met in your life. Bread mold is smarter. We sometimes say if you look into her eyes, you can hear the dial tone. No. Actually kind of great. Yeah, since this is video, I'm going to go fetch her real quick. Come here, Meg. I know. It's time to mess with you. Messing with Meg.
We have a guest star, Meg.
This is Meg. Look into those empty eyes. There is not a brain cell in that head.
Yeah, but she's so pretty.
She is. She's a beautiful girl. She's a beautiful kitty. Very soft, very sweet. She's incredibly good-tempered. as witness what she's putting up with. But she is profoundly not intelligent.
Well, that's okay. That could also be a dodge because I've known cats who played stupid until they had reason not to.
Yeah, no, it's not a dodge.
Well, we love you anyway, Meg. And I'm really fond of redheads under any circumstance,
There you
even
go.
if they're dim.
Who's
Yeah.
not right? Is it Meg? That's right. It's Meg.
Is she a Maine Coon or is she
No,
something else?
she's a shelter kitty. We have
Uh-huh.
shelter kitties here at the house. We've got Meg and we've got Mom's Hercules downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Meg here was acquired from Seattle Himalayan and Persian Rescue.
Mm-hmm.
She is neither a Himalayan nor a Persian, but she is fluffy.
Yeah.
She's about half the size of my smaller Maine Coon.
Ah, okay. And much more agreeable to being man or woman handled, as the case may be.
I mean, they're all agreeable to being manhandled.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Maine Coons are good-natured cats. All my cats come from good-natured stock. And if you manhandle them enough, they just get used to it.
Well, that's good to know. That's good.
Who has given up all hope? Is it you? It's
you. Yes, I think she has. And you also put your cats in your books. I noticed that the names that are your cats have relate, at least the ones I've seen, relate to the Encrypted series. I wouldn't be surprised if several others do too.
Yes and no. I mean, the characters in Encrypted came first. I named my cats after them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But you certainly draw on their behavior for people like Tybalt.
a little bit. Though I do kind of push back when people are like, oh, Tybalt is clearly a cat you've had. I'm like, dude,
He's a
Tybalt,
person.
a person who is having sexual relations with my main character. I do not like the implication of I think he's literally a cat. No.
Mm-hmm. But they're still wonderful regardless. Do
Yeah,
you
I
ever
spend a lot. Sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. You first.
I spend a lot of time with cats. You learn how their behavior works.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. Um, do you use those the Arn Thompson index for any of your series other than the indexing series, obviously, and perhaps pulling a plot line or two for Toby Day?
No, because the Arn Thompson index is literally what it says on the tin. It's an index. It is not the stories themselves. It's not even descriptions of the stories. What it is you open the Arn Thompson index and you flip to princesses with magical gifts. And I don't actually know what tale type that is. But you flip to anything within the story, and it's a tale type. A type is a traditional tale that has an independent existence. It may be told as a complete narrative and does not depend for its meaning on any other tale. It may indeed happen to be told within another tale, but the fact that it may be told alone attests the independence. It may consist of one motif or many. And 510A is Cinderella. A young woman is mistreated by her stepmother and stepsisters and has to live in the ashes as a servant. And we have lots of other little subtypes and things that fall in there. That doesn't give you the story or the plot line. You need to have a book that contains Cinderella to know the story of Cinderella. So the Arn Thompson itself, for all that it is, it's a great flex. You know, owning an Arn Thompson is bragging rights. Look at this thing I have. It makes me so much cooler than you, but it's not actually super useful on the day-to-day.
Mm-hmm. What would you say was your most useful reference?
My most useful reference for the Toby Day books is probably Catherine Briggs' Field Guide to the Little People.
Mm-hmm.
I think that may actually be the name of the Aerosmith. The Catherine Briggs is possibly called the World Guide to Fairies, Elves, Gnomes, and Other Little People. She was one of the people that invented the Myers-Briggs test. It's a whole thing, but her Encyclopedia of Fairies, Hobgoblins, Bogies, and Brownies is a phenomenally useful reference work. and I have multiple copies because it's completely out of print. And so I'm always afraid that I'm going to kill one. And I used that kind of like you'd use Wikipedia. You open it up and you read, and it tells you that a bogey is this thing, and it gives you books that will have more information on bogeys. And then you go and find those, and that lets you sort of triangulate your way to not the truth, because it's folklore, but to the most commonly known and accepted versions of the myth.
Mm-hmm. And basically helps you decide whether or not you're going to follow that most
Yep,
commonly
that's correct.
used.
And then I have a couple of encyclopedias of cryptozoology that I use for the encrypted books in a similar way.
Mm-hmm. Where does the Wayward Children series fit into all this? Do you use the Briggs or?
I don't use anything for Wayward Children.
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot of Portal Fantasy, and I was a kid in the 80s, which really kind of was the golden age of Portal Fantasy. Almost every successful children's cartoon during the 1980s was a Portal Fantasy. My Little Pony is a Portal Fantasy. The Fluffy Dogs is a Portal Fantasy. Anything where children from our world are being used as gateway characters to help kids enjoy the show and demand the toys is a Portal Fantasy. Technically, Rose Petal Place is a Portal Fantasy. So I grew up with that very much as a storytelling format and motif. And when Tor.com asked me to write them a novella, they wound up with Wayward Children, which is kind of a novelization of a song I wrote called Wicked Girls Saving Ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The Girls is about the characters from classic Portal Fantasy, and Wayward Children is about the archetypes of classic Portal Fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you still active in FILK, or have you
Right now,
away?
no. I am a songwriter and vocalist. I don't play the guitar. I took 5 years of guitar lessons before my teacher said he couldn't take my money anymore because it was cruel. I am not good at the guitar. So how am I supposed to make music? Like, I can sit in my room and sing alone. I can kind of play the spoons, but not really. So virtual FilkCons are a circle of hell to me. I understand why people would choose a virtual FilkCon over no Filk at all, and I don't fault you if that is what works better for you, but it's not for me. I am active when there is physical Filk. I've been working on my latest album for several years now, but my recording engineer is down in the Bay Area, so I have to be able to go to California to finish recording it.
Do you have instrumentalists who play with you, or?
I do, yes.
Okay. And unfortunately, we're sort of not traveling right at the moment, but hopefully those days will, come back soon for all of us.
Vaccination.
Yep, vaccination is a good thing. And where, you've mentioned studying folklore, but from what I've read, admittedly, we're talking way in the before times of LiveJournal, you also have a background in science. And
I was a dual major in folklore and herpetology, which is the study of reptiles and amphibians.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically the dragons degree. That's all I'm equipped for is dragons, big fantasy lizards. It's kind of what I studied in school.
So then, I was thinking, because again, thinking back to LiveJournal, because you talk about invertebrates with such fondness, banana slugs and all things like that, that your background might have played into your alter ego, your secret identity, your not so secret identity as Mira Grant, zombie queen.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, how did Mira Grant come about?
Well, you've referenced LiveJournal, so it's clear that you remember the LiveJournal days at least a little. You may remember that there was a time when I talked about Feed as being a Seanan McGuire book, as being a book I was writing, and that was never a secret and never hidden. Well, I sold the October Day books in 2009. 2008. I sold them in 2008. The first book came out in 2009. Mid 2009, we're trying to sell Feed, which is the first book published under the Mira Grant name. And one thing that is super fun, two things that are super fun actually about writing. One, bookstores base their order of any given book off the sales of your previous book. The only book that is an exception to that is your debut, where they base their sales on how well the sales team does. And two, a phenomenal number of readers will not follow an author across genres. A phenomenal number of readers will straight up legit look at a book, think it looks really interesting, think it looks fun, see the name of the author on the cover, and immediately prejudge the genre that it's in and refuse to read it if they're not in the mood for that genre, or if they didn't like the way the author handled that genre, whatever. The Newsflesh books, and pretty much all the Mira Grant books, are biomedical science fiction. They are not urban fantasy. They don't have fantastic elements for the most part. There are a couple of Subterranean Press books that have horrific fantastic elements, but they are much more grounded in science and research and giving me an excuse to pick up a scalpel. So when we went to Orbit and said, hey, we've got this zombie trilogy, ooh, big science, ooh, they said, we don't want to yoke the sales of our big science fiction trilogy to the sales of a debut urban fantasy author in 2009, which was very reasonable given that in 2009, everyone was saying urban fantasy was dead. Mm-hmm. Yep, people said urban fantasy was dead in 2009. I was worried about my career, so I launched a zombie trilogy. Way to dead genre change, Shannon.
Hey, but it worked. I mean, you caught the wave.
No one is sure why. I was like I was on the last train to Busan. No one knows how I made it out. But so Orbit said we want a pseudonym for these books. It's okay if it's open. It's okay if she admits it's her, but we want a pseudonym. And so we came up with Mira Grant. And I am now genuinely glad we did, for the same reason that Walt Disney opened Touchstone in the 90s, so that no one would ever utter the phrase, Walt Disney Pictures presents Reservoir Dogs. Avoid sentence was their entire motivation. I have had literally dozens of readers come up to me and say, I read Feed. It's my favorite zombie book. It's changed my life. It has made my world manifestly better. Some variation on that sounds incredibly self-serving when I say it statement. And then follow that up with, I would never have read it if I had known it was you. Because urban fantasy gets dismissed as a girly genre. It's all vampire porn in some people's eyes. And those people would not have voluntarily read my science fiction if they had connected it in any way to my urban fantasy.
That seems so tragic, because it's such a limiting view of urban fantasy. Because, I mean, you got things, you've got everything from Toby Day to, yes, Charlene Harris's, Stokey Stackhouse series, to Ben Aronovich, Rivers of London. That it is a huge genre.
So part of the problem is actually in what you just said. I love Charlene to death. She's one of my favorite humans. Stokey Stackhouse is not urban fantasy. And calling it urban fantasy does it a disservice and does the genre a disservice. Stokey Stackhouse is paranormal romance.
Fair enough.
That is a sister genre. It's an adjacent genre. There is nothing wrong with being either one over the other. But it means that when Charlene was writing them, she was following different rules than an urban fantasy author is following. One of the rules she was following is the paramount to romance rule that there is always a guaranteed happy ending at the end. Mm-hmm. That's not there for urban fantasy, because urban fantasy is not an inherently romantic genre. And so the fact that it can be so very easy to confuse urban fantasy with paranormal romance is part of why it gets so ghettoized, for lack of a better term. People take a paranormal romance book for an urban fantasy book, don't like romance, which I still say is just kind of silly, because romance is a mood as much as anything, and then use that to dismiss an entire genre that they've never actually read a single representative of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always found that the willingness to dismiss romance was A, silly, given the volume of sales that you have in romance, and B, when just about every popular fiction encompasses a romance of some variety, most of them being the reward for having achieved the goal of the narrative.
There is a difference between romantic elements and a romance, and one of them is in those rules that I cited before.
Yeah.
Every genre has its rules, and
Mhm.
have to understand and accept them to a certain degree. You're not being clever and subversive if you decide you're going to write a romance that doesn't have a happy ending. You're pissing off your romance readers, and you're not getting them for your next book, is what you're doing.
Mhm.
And that does, unfortunately, hurt a lot of people's willingness to onboard with urban fantasy because they've already decided to dismiss it as being a genre that it isn't.
Yeah. Well, I think they're all good, frankly, but
Agreed.
that's just me, you know. Um, when what what are you looking forward to in the near future? What are you working on now? Any new projects we should be looking out for? I mean, you write so damn much, and it's all good.
Well,
Uh,
thank you. I
yeah,
mean, what gets
what
published?
direction are you going in next? What can we look forward to?
Well, what you can look forward to right now, I am working on the June, July Patreon story for my Patreon because I'm trying to bring the timeline that I've been working in there up to date with the encrypted novels.
Hmm.
Um,
Bless you.
bless me. Um, I literally just turned in the October daybook for this year on Friday.
Ah,
Um, and just finished writing the encrypted book for next year on Tuesday.
mhm.
So right now, I'm mostly in short fiction, editorial, and breathing land.
Yeah. Yeah, well, with two books and multiple short fictions, that's perfectly understandable. And I'm going to be looking forward to both of those titles whenever they are whenever they are announced. Okay, we've talked a lot about writing over the course of this interview, and we are sort of coming up on the close of our time together.
Okay.
So, what advice? I know that there is no one size fits all in this, but what would you tell an aspiring author, or what would you tell your younger self in terms of uh, what you should be doing as a writer?
I mean, I would not tell my younger self anything. I'm always a little horrified by that particular thought experiment because so much of success and getting things right and all of that, so incredibly, ridiculously much of it is luck and timing. And those are factors you can't control.
Mhm.
Honestly, I would be afraid if you gave me the opportunity to talk to my past self, I'd be afraid that I would be the butterfly and just I would flap my wings and somehow that would destroy my entire career because I would be 5 minutes out of sync with where I needed to be.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't talk to me out of sheer fear. Give me a time machine and I will use it to go back in time and buy vintage My Little Ponies new in package. Um, Now, to other aspiring writers, I kind of want to restate that. So much of it is luck and timing. You may think that you're amazing. Maybe you are amazing. Maybe you are the single best thing to happen to whatever genre you're working in the last 20 years. That doesn't guarantee you success. No one owes you anything. So much is just going to be in when do you hit, how do you hit the right people? Do you get lucky? And people who try to downplay the part of luck in this business usually just don't want to admit that they didn't actually somehow magically earn everything they've got. No one has earned everything they've got. That's not how it works. Um, the other big one is you mentioned that there's nothing universal, and there's not. The only completely universal writing advice I have ever found is that there is no completely universal writing advice. There is some universal business advice. The single best piece of advice I was given came from Todd McCaffrey, Anne McCaffrey's son, who I met at a Lost Con right after Rosemary and Rue came out. Or right before Rosemary and Rue came out. I was able to give him an ARC, which he did give to his mom. So Anne McCaffrey read my book before she died, and he says she liked it. But Todd says, you're a brand new novelist. You're a baby novelist, all full of excitement and novelty. That's wonderful. Can I give you some advice? And I said, yes, please. That would be great. Tell me anything. I am a sponge. Fill me with knowledge. And he says, don't quit your day job until you can pay your bills off the royalties. And he was right. You know, don't quit your day job until you can, with reasonable assurance, know that you'll be able to pay your power bill, your food bill, and your vet bills off of your royalties. Because otherwise, you know, if you go, oh, I got a big advance, great. Maybe that book doesn't sell. Maybe you never see another big advance. And advances, you know, we're not good at big numbers. An advance can be a huge check. The single biggest check I've ever been handed was $45,000. That is more money than I made in a year, my first 4 years in the workforce. I died. But that check was for 3 years of work. A third of it went immediately to the government. So I now had to live for 2 years in the state of California on $30,000. That's not even a poverty wage. You know, so it's not, oh, poor me, I don't get paid enough. I get paid reasonably well. I'm doing okay. But don't let the numbers on the check make you think that that's what it's going to be every month. Anyone who tells you to write every day or you're not a real writer is lying to you. Anyone who tells you that you have to like everyone or you will be sent to the Regina George box of punishment is lying to you. Anyone who tells you that if you are a female or assumed female author, you must let older male authors put their hands anywhere they want on you is both lying to you and wants a broken wrist. I punched someone who shall not be named in the throat because he thought that sticking his hand down my shirt and inside my bra was a great way of saying hello to the new baby author. And he didn't like it.
I wouldn't have blamed you a bit. And we could share stories off.
Yep. And the
screen.
convention code of conduct would probably kick me out today, and I would go willingly. I would be upset if somebody groped me, I hit them in response, and then I was the one that got kicked out. But if we both got kicked out, nope, that's fair.
That's perfectly fair. Okay, bonus round. Before I can, I'll ask people. I'll ask you, not people, but you are people. Unless you're actually an item on that Arn Thompson list, but we won't go there.
Oh, I'm the vanguard of an invading race of alien plant people on its way to wipe out your puny planet.
I remember that story from Steampunk versus Alien. It was brilliant.
Lady Anthea's Guide to Horticultural Warfare.
Absolutely brilliant. Favorite story in the whole thing, and I had a story in there.
Awesome.
So, yeah, cool. But this is the bonus round, and who is this?
This is Thomas.
Hello, Thomas.
He is one of my Maine Coons.
And like he's big.
Many of us in fandom, he has an anxiety disorder. But because he is a cat with an anxiety disorder and not a people with an anxiety disorder, his causes him to overgroom and consume too much of his hair. So in order to keep him from getting really sick, we have him shaved and then he wears clothes. So this is his Hawaiian shirt.
Hello, Thomas. You're very dapper in that shirt.
He actually really likes his clothes because they make him fancy.
Well, he's very fancy, I'm sure, even without them. I mean, look at that face. And it's so much love. And so many whiskers. Yes.
Go ahead and speed round me.
Yep. This is the bonus round, as I was saying, and we do have that bonus of the cat. Is there anything that you would like to add? Anything that you wish we had addressed today that we haven't that you'd like to talk about, including Pokemon?
I do like Pokemon. You know, I've spent most of the panini that we've been in for the last year collecting vintage My Little Ponies. My therapist actually told me that I should, which is the single best thing any therapist has ever said is, nope, buying My Little Ponies is self-care for you. Keep doing it. So at this point, I have one of the larger collections of Generation 1 My Little Ponies in North America. I have good cats. I do like Pokemon. I'm very excited about the upcoming games. I am a competitive Pokemon video game player, though I was supposed to test into the Washington Pokemon League in 2020, and I bet you can guess why that didn't happen.
I'm sorry.
A new area's Pokemon League. You get to make 10-year-olds cry.
Mhm. Yeah, 2020 was something better seen in the rearview mirror.
Yes.
So, okay, this is it. Where can folks find you and your work on the web?
So, as far as I am aware, all of the people who claim to be Seanan McGuire on social media are actually me. So I am Seanan McGuire on Twitter. I am Seanan McGuire on Tumblr. I am on TikTok, but I don't make videos. I just use it to watch funny D&D stuff because D&D makes me happy. Mostly you will find me on Twitter or Tumblr or on my website, which is SeananMcGuire.com. Do you see a pattern? I am also on Patreon as Seanan McGuire. Jean Marie mentioned earlier that, that's one of the places where I am. You reliably get a piece of short fiction every month, starting at the $1 level. And you get the joy and wonder of knowing that you've paid my vet bills. My cats really appreciate you as much as they appreciate anyone because they are cats.
Yeah. And you're not only paying the vet bills, you're paying for their wardrobe too.
You are.
And a very fine wardrobe it is. Thank you so much, Seanan, for sharing this hour with us.
No, thank
And
you for having me.
Our pleasure. And thank you out there from ConTinual, the never-ending convention. Stay safe.